"You'll regret choosing me," the defiant black woman whispered from the auction block, her chains rattling as the weathered rancher stepped forward with gold in his calloused hand, smiling. "I already regret waiting this long." The crowd jeered at her educated speech, certain she'd break under frontier hardship like all the others before her. They assumed her fate sealed, another soul crushed by the unforgiving western dust. But the mountain of a man who claimed her carried secrets deeper than his weathered face revealed, and his interest in her ran far beyond what any witness could imagine. In the drought-strangled town where water meant survival and land meant power, their unexpected alliance would either save them both or destroy everything they'd ever known. Will the woman the town dismissed as worthless prove to be the key to their salvation or their ultimate ruin? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The iron shackles bit into Eliza's wrists as the wagon lurched through Dusty Bend's main street. Dust clouds swirled around cracked storefronts and withered hitching posts. The drought had turned everything brown and brittle. She clutched the leather satchel containing her marriage certificate and Thomas's final letter. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a free woman in Denver. Now bounty hunters had dragged her here like common property. The wagon stopped before a wooden platform in the town square. A crowd gathered, their faces hard with anticipation. Children pointed. Women whispered behind fans. Men spat tobacco juice and sized her up like livestock. Eliza stepped onto the platform, her back straight despite the chains. She'd graduated from Oberlin College. She'd studied geology and hydrology. She wouldn't let them see her break. The auctioneer, a thin man with yellowed teeth, raised his voice above the murmur. The crowd pressed closer. Their eyes held cruelty and boredom in equal measure. From the back of the crowd, a tall figure watched in silence. Josiah Wilkes had been searching for her for 3 months. His brother's letter had been clear. Find Eliza Carter, honor the marriage, make things right. The bidding started low. Eliza scanned the faces, seeing only greed and casual malice. These people viewed her as a solution to their labor problems, nothing more. Then the weathered rancher stepped forward. His boots thudded against the dry earth. The crowd parted. Everyone knew Josiah Wilkes and his sprawling ranch operation. His gray eyes met hers. Something passed between them. Recognition. Purpose. Hope. She leaned forward, her voice barely audible, the words that would change everything. He smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. His response carried across the silent square. The transaction completed swiftly. Gold changed hands. The auctioneer removed her shackles with obvious reluctance. Josiah's wagon waited at the platform's edge. They rode in. Silence toward the mountains. Eliza expected to be taken to servants' quarters, maybe a crude cabin behind the main house. She'd prepared herself for the worst. The Broken Arrow Ranch stretched across the valley like a small kingdom. Cattle dotted the brown pastures. The main house rose from the landscape, solid and imposing. Josiah stopped the wagon at the front entrance. Eliza stared. This wasn't right. Ranch hands used the back door. Hired help never entered through the front. Inside, the house felt cool and spacious. Leather furniture filled the main room. Books lined the walls. A piano sat near the window. Josiah walked to a heavy desk and withdrew a document. His movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial. He spread the papers on the table between them. The marriage certificate bore official seals and signatures. Thomas Wilkes and Eliza Carter, married in Denver 6 months ago. Legal, binding, legitimate. Her knees nearly buckled. Thomas had promised to write to his brother, to prepare the way for her arrival. His mining accident had stolen that chance. Josiah's voice was steady, matter of fact. He'd been searching since receiving Thomas's letter. The bounty hunters had found her first, ignoring her protests about being a free woman with legal documentation. The implications hit her like a physical blow. The marriage made her Thomas's widow. Colorado territorial law granted wives inheritance rights. Half of everything Thomas owned now belonged to her. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, but no rain would come. The drought had lasted 8 months. Wells ran dry, crops withered. Desperation hung over the territory like smoke. A horse approached at full gallop. Silas McGraw dismounted before the animal stopped moving. His banker's clothes were dusty from hard riding. McGraw burst through the door without invitation. His pale eyes took in the scene. The documents on the table. Eliza sitting in the good chair like family. His face darkened when Josiah explained the situation. A black woman inheriting prime ranch land would complicate everything. McGraw had been working for months to acquire distressed properties during the drought. McGraw produced his own papers, foreclosure documents, claims of unpaid debts and overdue taxes. His voice carried barely concealed threats. But Josiah had been expecting this fight. The ranch finances were solid. Thomas had been careful with money, even during hard times. After McGraw left, making promises that sounded like warnings, Eliza faced her choice. She could take her half of the inheritance and disappear. Start over somewhere safe, somewhere anonymous. Or she could stay and fight for legitimacy in a place that would never willingly accept her. The decision crystallized as she looked through the window at the dying land. Her college training in hydrology and geology suddenly felt relevant. The drought wasn't just bad luck. Water existed underground if you knew where to look. Town gossip traveled faster than wildfire. By evening, everyone in Dusty Bend knew about the black woman who'd inherited the Broken Arrow Ranch. Saloon conversations turned ugly. Store owners shook their heads. Families worried about what changes might come. Clara May wiped down glasses in her saloon, listening to the complaints and threats. As the only woman business owner in town, she understood something about fighting for respect in a hostile place. The stakes were becoming clear. McGraw's foreclosure schemes depended on desperation. If someone could solve the water crisis, his plans would crumble. But that someone would need knowledge, determination, and the courage to stand against an entire community's prejudice. Eliza Carter had all three qualities. The question was whether she'd survive long enough to use them. News of Eliza's inheritance spread through Dusty Bend like poison in a well. Store owners refused her business. Children threw rocks at her wagon. Women crossed the street to avoid her path. The bank became McGraw's headquarters for coordinating opposition. He held meetings with prominent landowners, painting dark pictures of property values plummeting. His words carried weight in a community already stretched thin by drought. McGraw's masterstroke arrived on the Tuesday morning train. Professor Cornelius Blackwood stepped onto the platform, wearing flowing robes and carrying a divining rod made of polished wood. His advertisement promised miraculous water discoveries using ancient mystical techniques. The town gathered in the square to witness Blackwood's demonstration. He waved his rod dramatically, muttering incantations in what sounded like Latin. The crowd watched with desperate fascination. Eliza observed from the general store porch, noting Blackwood's theatrical gestures. His methods contradicted everything she'd learned about groundwater and geological formations, but the townspeople hung on his every word. Blackwood pointed toward the eastern hills. Water flowed beneath that ridge, he declared. Abundant springs waited for proper divination. The crowd cheered. McGraw smiled and counted coins. That afternoon, Eliza walked the same eastern hills with different eyes. She studied rock formations, soil composition, and natural drainage patterns. Her father had taught her to read the land like a book. Water left signs if you knew how to look. The geological survey revealed harsh truths. The eastern hills sat on solid bedrock with minimal water retention. Any wells dug there would produce dust and disappointment. Young Tommy Chen found her near sunset, struggling with a broken surveying instrument. The 12-year-old Chinese boy had been watching her work for days. His family ran the laundry service, another group of outsiders scratching for acceptance. Tommy's small hands proved surprisingly skilled at mechanical repairs. He'd learned to fix washing machines and pressing equipment by necessity. Together, they restored the surveying compass to working condition. Eliza explained her methods while Tommy listened with bright, curious eyes. She showed him how to read geological maps, how to identify water-bearing rock layers, how to trace underground streams by surface features. The boy absorbed knowledge like parched earth accepting rain. His questions grew more sophisticated each day. Soon he was carrying equipment and recording measurements with careful precision. Father Miguel found them working near the old mission ruins. The elderly priest had ministered to Dusty Bend for 20 years, watching families arrive with hope and leave with broken dreams. He recognized dedication when he saw it. The mission's archives contained records dating back 40 years. Father Miguel spread yellowed maps and documents across the altar. Here were the original surveyor reports, the early mining claims, the forgotten well locations. Eliza traced patterns across the historical documents. The town had been built in the wrong place. Early settlers had chosen the current location for its flat terrain and railroad access, but the water sources lay 2 miles south, following an underground river system. Clara May joined their evening meetings after closing the saloon. Her establishment occupied the oldest building in town, constructed during the initial mining boom. The basement held forgotten storage rooms filled with dusty records. Mining company reports revealed extensive geological surveys from the territory's early days. Engineers had mapped underground water systems while searching for mineral deposits. Their findings confirmed Eliza's analysis. The 4 unlikely allies worked in secret. They compiled evidence, cross-referenced historical data, and built a comprehensive picture of the region's true water resources. The work progressed slowly but steadily. Meanwhile, Blackwood's Eastern Hill excavation began with great fanfare. Townspeople volunteered labor and equipment. McGraw provided financing. Everyone expected quick results. Eliza predicted failure within 2 weeks. The rock formations couldn't support significant water flow, but she kept her conclusions private, waiting for the right moment to act. Days passed without water. Blackwood offered increasingly elaborate explanations. The spiritual energy needed more time to manifest. Underground demons were blocking the flow. Additional rituals were required. Some townspeople began expressing doubts. Others defended Blackwood with desperate intensity. The community fractured along lines of hope and skepticism. Tommy Chen brought disturbing news from his evening rounds. Strange barrels had appeared behind McGraw's property. Chemical smells drifted from his storage sheds. Men worked there after dark, loading wagons with unknown cargo. Eliza investigated during the next moonless night. The barrels contained mining chemicals and processing compounds. Fresh tire tracks led toward the town's existing well. Sights. The implications sent ice through her veins. She tested water samples from 3 different sources using chemistry equipment borrowed from the abandoned assay office. The results confirmed her worst fears. Someone was deliberately contaminating the current water supply. The contamination wasn't random. Specific chemicals had been chosen to create gradual poisoning that would be blamed on natural drought conditions. The scheme was methodical and calculated. Father Miguel's illness records supported the chemical analysis. Stomach ailments had increased dramatically over recent months. Children showed signs of low-level poisoning. The elderly suffered most severely. Clara May connected the final pieces. Her saloon customers included railroad workers and freight handlers. They'd mentioned unusual shipments arriving from McGraw's accounts. Industrial chemicals, mining supplies, equipment designed for water processing. The conspiracy reached far beyond simple land grabbing. Someone was manufacturing the crisis to gain control of the entire region. McGraw had outside backing, serious money, and a plan that threatened every family in the territory. Eliza faced a choice that would define everything. She could expose the contamination and try to convince a hostile community to trust her analysis. Or she could stay silent and watch the town slowly poison itself while Blackwood's useless digging continued. The decision came with deadly stakes. Failure meant more than personal humiliation. People were dying slowly, including the children who threw rocks at her wagon. Eliza's hands trembled as she held her father's surveying compass. Samuel Carter had been born into slavery but learned engineering during Reconstruction. He'd taught her that water always told the truth, even when men lied. The memory came flooding back. She was 8 years old, watching her father map underground streams for freed slaves seeking farmland. He'd shown her how limestone formations held water like hidden reservoirs, how underground rivers carved paths through solid rock over centuries. Those lessons had carried her through Oberlin College, where professors dismissed her questions about practical applications. They taught theory. Her father had taught survival. Now she applied everything she'd learned to Dusty Ben's desperate situation. The geological surveys painted a clear picture. Water flowed beneath the southern mesa in quantities that could supply 10 towns this size. Tommy Chen proved invaluable as her assistant. His small size allowed him to crawl into abandoned mine shafts and take measurements. His mechanical aptitude kept their equipment functioning despite harsh conditions. They worked systematically, mapping underground formations while Blackwood's eastern excavation continued producing nothing but dust and excuses. The professor's theatrical performances grew more elaborate as his failures mounted. Eliza's breakthrough came during her survey of the old Martinez well. The original settlers had dug here 40 years ago before abandoning the site. Local legend claimed the well was cursed because it never held water. Her geological analysis revealed the truth. The Martinez site sat directly above a natural aquifer, but the original diggers had stopped 3 feet short of the water table. Fear and superstition had robbed them of the region's most abundant water source. She lowered measuring instruments into the shaft, while Tommy operated the hand-cranked winch. 20 feet down, the metal probe struck something unexpected. Not rock, not dirt. Water-saturated sand that indicated a major underground stream. The discovery sent excitement through their small group. Clara May provided funding for proper excavation equipment. Father Miguel blessed their efforts and prayed for success. Josiah offered ranch hands to assist with the heavy labor. They worked in secret, knowing McGraw would sabotage any competition to Blackwood's operation. Dawn to dusk digging revealed layer after layer of promising geological formations. On the 7th day, Tommy's shovel struck something hard. Not bedrock, metal. They'd found the original well casing, buried under decades of accumulated debris. Clearing the obstruction required careful work. The old iron pipes had rusted, but remained structurally sound. Eliza calculated water pressure and flow rates while the team excavated around the casing. The breakthrough happened at sunset. Water bubbled up from the shaft, clear and cold and abundant. Tommy whooped with joy. Father Miguel fell to his knees in thanksgiving. Clara May wept openly, but Eliza's scientific training demanded verification. She collected samples for chemical analysis, tested flow rates, and measured the aquifer's capacity. The results exceeded her most optimistic projections. The Martinez well could produce 500 gallons per hour indefinitely. The underground river system connected to mountain snowpack that recharged the aquifer annually. This wasn't just a temporary solution. It was permanent water security. Word of their success couldn't remain secret long. Ranch hands talked in saloons. Townspeople noticed increased activity at the Martinez site. McGraw's spies reported strange developments to their employer. The confrontation came during Sunday morning church services. McGraw burst through the chapel doors as Father Miguel delivered his sermon about miracles and answered prayers. McGraw's face was purple with rage. He'd invested heavily in Blackwood's operation and promised his outside investors quick returns on land acquisitions. A functioning well threatened everything. He declared Eliza's success impossible. No woman could accomplish what trained professionals had failed to achieve. The water must be contaminated or temporary. People shouldn't risk their health on unproven sources. But scientific evidence spoke louder than McGraw's protests. Eliza presented her chemical analyses, geological surveys, and flow calculations. The Martinez well water tested cleaner than any source currently available to the town. Half the congregation remained skeptical. They'd endured too many disappointments to embrace hope easily. But families with sick children listened with desperate attention. Parents watched their neighbors' faces for signs of belief or doubt. Tommy Chen's testimony carried unexpected weight. The boy described everything he'd witnessed during the excavation. His detailed technical knowledge impressed even the doubters. Children didn't typically understand aquifer dynamics or water table measurements. Father Miguel added his moral authority to the scientific evidence. He'd personally blessed the well and witnessed the water's emergence. Divine providence had guided Eliza's efforts, he declared. The community should embrace this gift gratefully. But McGraw wasn't finished fighting. He produced legal documents claiming prior mineral rights to the Martinez property. His lawyers would contest any development that interfered with his business interests. The legal challenge revealed McGraw's desperation. Mineral rights didn't typically include water access, especially for wells predating his claims. But litigation could delay development for months while people continued suffering. Clara May's investigation had uncovered more disturbing evidence. The chemical contamination of existing wells was accelerating. Someone was increasing the poisoning rate, possibly in response to the Martinez well discovery. Families were getting sicker. Dr. Morrison reported increased cases of stomach ailments and mysterious fevers. The elderly Mrs. Patterson had died during the night, though her family attributed the death to natural causes. Time was running out. Eliza could prove the Martinez well's safety and abundance, but legal challenges might prevent its use. Meanwhile, the contamination continued poisoning people who had no other water source. The community faced an impossible choice: trust the scientific evidence presented by an outsider they'd scorned, or continue relying on contaminated sources while waiting for Blackwood's promised miracle. Eliza's reputation hung in the balance, but human lives hung higher. The children's faces haunted her dreams. Tommy Chen's family showed early signs of chemical poisoning. Even Father Miguel appeared weakened by whatever toxins flowed through the town's current water supply. She'd found the solution. Now she had to convince a prejudiced community to choose survival over suspicion. Clara May's hands shook as she counted the barrels behind McGraw's storage shed. 17 containers marked with mining company logos. The chemical smell burned her nostrils even through the cloth mask she'd fashioned from bar towels. She'd followed the wagon tracks from town wells to this hidden compound 3 nights running. Each time, McGraw's men arrived after midnight with their deadly cargo. They worked efficiently, loading smaller containers and disappearing toward different parts of town. The shed's padlock yielded to her lockpicks within minutes. Years of managing a saloon had taught her useful skills for dealing with locked doors and hidden secrets. Inside, correspondents filled wooden crates with damning evidence. Letters from Denver mining interests detailed the conspiracy's scope. They'd identified Dusty Bend as a perfect target for land acquisition during economic distress. The drought provided natural cover for artificial water contamination. Local resistance would crumble once people started dying. McGraw's payments came from Consolidated Western Mining, a company that specialized in acquiring mineral-rich territories through manufactured crises. They'd used similar schemes in Nevada and Arizona with devastating effectiveness. The contamination schedule showed methodical precision. Initial doses created mild illness that mimicked drought-related health problems. Gradual increases would trigger desperation sales as families fled the dying town. Final phases called for complete water system failure followed by mass evacuation. Clara May photographed everything using the camera equipment from the newspaper office. The territorial marshal would need irrefutable proof to prosecute crimes of this magnitude. Written testimony alone wouldn't convict men with Denver connections and political influence. But documenting the conspiracy was only half the battle. McGraw had accelerated his timeline since the Martinez well discovery. Fresh chemical shipments arrived daily. The contamination levels were approaching lethal concentrations. Tommy Chen's midnight surveillance confirmed the worst fears. He'd watched McGraw's men dump industrial solvents directly into the town's main reservoir. The boys' detailed drawings showed exactly where each contamination point was located. The poisoning wasn't random or accidental. Someone had studied Dusty Bend's water infrastructure and identified every critical access point. They knew precisely how to maximize harm while maintaining plausible deniability. Eliza's chemical analysis revealed the contamination's sophisticated nature. Multiple compounds created synergistic effects that amplified toxicity. Symptoms would progress from mild discomfort to organ failure over several weeks. By the time people recognized the danger, irreversible damage would be done. Father Miguel's parish records provided the human cost of McGraw's scheme. 17 families had reported serious illnesses in the past month. Children showed signs of neurological damage. Pregnant women suffered mysterious complications. The elderly were dying at rates that exceeded normal mortality. The conspiracy reached beyond simple poisoning. McGraw had orchestrated food shortages by contaminating irrigation sources. Livestock deaths reduced the meat supply. Crop failures eliminated local produce. The town faced starvation, alongside water contamination. Consolidated Western's business model depended on complete community collapse. They couldn't risk leaving survivors who might testify about the manufactured crisis. The final phase called for total depopulation, followed by mineral extraction rights acquisition. Clara May's investigation uncovered the timeline for McGraw's endgame. A town meeting scheduled for the following week would present residents with a final evacuation opportunity. Those who remained would face contamination levels designed to kill within days. The evidence painted McGraw as a local administrator in a much larger criminal enterprise. His banking credentials provided perfect cover for financial manipulation. His community standing allowed unrestricted access to infrastructure systems. But Consolidated Western had made crucial miscalculations. They hadn't expected scientific resistance from someone with Eliza's geological expertise. They hadn't planned for community members who could organize effective opposition. Most importantly, they'd underestimated the Martinez well's significance. Eliza's discovery threatened their entire business model. Clean water meant people could survive the contamination long enough to seek justice. The corporate correspondence revealed panic at the highest levels. Denver executives demanded immediate resolution of the Dusty Bend situation. McGraw faced termination if he couldn't eliminate the water supply threat within days. Tommy Chen brought terrifying news from his family's laundry business. McGraw had ordered industrial quantities of highly concentrated acids, supposedly for mining operations. The chemicals were powerful enough to destroy well casings and contaminate aquifers permanently. The boy had overheard McGraw's men planning to attack the Martinez well directly. They would pour acid into the shaft and collapse the casing with explosive charges. The destruction would appear accidental, blamed on unstable geological conditions. Eliza faced the ultimate test of her scientific training and moral courage. She could document the conspiracy and hope territorial authorities would investigate eventually. Or she could take immediate action to protect the community, knowing failure meant certain death. The stakes had escalated beyond personal survival or property rights. McGraw's accelerated timeline threatened every family in Dusty Bend. Children would die horrible deaths while their parents remained ignorant of the true cause. Josiah's ranch hands reported increased surveillance around the Broken Arrow property. McGraw's men were positioning themselves for coordinated attacks on anyone who threatened their operation. The isolation that once provided safety now created vulnerability. Clara May proposed a desperate strategy. They would gather irrefutable evidence and confront McGraw publicly before he could complete his final assault. The town meeting provided the perfect forum for exposing the conspiracy, but timing would be critical. The evidence had to be overwhelming and undeniable. McGraw's political connections could deflect accusations unless the proof was absolutely conclusive. They would get one chance to save the community or watch it die in agony. Father Miguel volunteered to contact territorial authorities, but communication would take weeks. The railroad telegraph was controlled by McGraw's associates. Messages might be intercepted or delayed until the contamination completed its deadly work. Everything depended on convincing a prejudiced community to trust the scientific analysis of a woman they'd rejected and scorned. Eliza's reputation would determine whether families lived or died in the coming days. The town hall overflowed with desperate families clutching sick children and dying livestock. McGraw had called the emergency meeting to present his final solution: evacuation within 48 hours or face complete water system failure. He stood at the podium wearing his finest suit, projecting authority and concern in equal measure. Behind him, charts and graphs showed declining water levels and increasing contamination. The presentation looked professional and terrifying. McGraw's voice carried practiced sympathy as he described the town's hopeless situation. The drought had triggered geological instability. Underground aquifers were collapsing. Remaining water sources contained dangerous mineral concentrations that threatened human health. Consolidated Western Mining had graciously offered to purchase all properties at fair market value. Families could relocate to Denver with enough money to start fresh. Children would receive medical treatment for their mysterious illnesses. Everyone would survive if they acted quickly. The alternative was death, slow poisoning from contaminated water, starvation as food supplies dwindled, disease outbreaks as sanitation systems failed. McGraw painted vivid pictures of communities that had ignored similar warnings and paid the ultimate price. Eliza sat in the back row, her evidence carefully organized in a leather portfolio. Tommy Chen waited near the side door with the chemical analysis equipment. Clara May had positioned herself where she could photograph the crowd's reactions. Father Miguel rose from his seat when McGraw finished speaking. The elderly priest's voice carried moral authority that commanded attention, even from skeptics. He requested permission for an alternative presentation before the community voted on evacuation. McGraw's face darkened, but public refusal would appear suspicious. He agreed to 5 minutes for opposing viewpoints, confident that fear would overcome any rational argument. Eliza walked to the podium carrying her father's surveying compass and a jar of crystal-clear water drawn from the Martinez well that morning. The crowd's murmur turned hostile as they recognized the woman they'd scorned and rejected. She began with facts instead of appeals for sympathy. Water contamination wasn't natural or accidental. Someone had deliberately poisoned the town's supply using industrial chemicals designed to create specific symptoms. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Tommy Chen brought forward the chemical analysis equipment and demonstrated the testing process on samples from 3 different wells. Each sample turned deep red when exposed to the contamination detection solution. The Martinez well water remained clear and pure. The boy's testimony carried unexpected weight. He described watching men dump barrels of chemicals into the town reservoir during midnight operations. His detailed drawings showed exact locations and procedures. Children rarely fabricated such technical information. Clara May presented the photographed correspondence from McGraw's storage shed. Letters from Denver executives outlined the conspiracy's scope and timeline. Payment records showed McGraw's compensation for orchestrating the manufactured crisis. The documentary evidence painted a complete picture of corporate criminality. Consolidated Western had targeted Dusty Bend for mineral extraction rights. They'd created the water crisis to force population evacuation and property sales at below-market prices. McGraw attempted damage control by attacking the messenger rather than addressing the evidence. He questioned Eliza's qualifications and motivations. A woman with no formal credentials couldn't understand complex geological processes. Her claims were desperate attempts to gain attention and sympathy. But scientific facts didn't care about gender or race. The chemical analysis spoke for itself. The contamination patterns matched industrial poisoning protocols exactly. The timeline correlated perfectly with increased illness reports throughout the community. Father Miguel added his moral testimony to the scientific evidence. He'd witnessed families suffering from symptoms that matched chemical poisoning rather than natural illness. Children showed neurological damage consistent with industrial toxin exposure. The priest's medical observations carried authority that McGraw couldn't dismiss or discredit. Father Miguel had ministered to the community for 20 years. His diagnostic experience exceeded that of most trained physicians. Several families began connecting their personal experiences to the larger pattern. The Henderson baby's mysterious seizures had started after the family switched to the new well water. Mrs. Patterson's final illness had progressed exactly as Eliza's analysis predicted. McGraw grew increasingly desperate as community sentiment shifted against him. He produced legal documents claiming prior ownership of the Martinez well site. His lawyers would contest any development that interfered with legitimate mining operations, but Josiah had anticipated legal challenges. His property records predated McGraw's claims by 15 years. The Martinez well sat squarely within the Broken Arrow Ranch boundaries. McGraw had no legal standing to prevent its development. The banker's facade began cracking under pressure from hostile questions. How had he acquired detailed geological surveys without conducting official studies? Why had his contamination warnings coincided exactly with increased chemical shipments? Tommy Chen delivered the final devastating blow. He'd discovered McGraw's men preparing explosive charges near the Martinez well site. They planned to destroy the clean water source that same night. ensuring the community's complete dependence on contaminated supplies. The evidence became overwhelming. McGraw had orchestrated every aspect of the crisis from initial contamination to final evacuation demands. His corporate backers had provided funding, equipment, and strategic guidance for the systematic destruction of an entire community. Families who'd been preparing for evacuation began demanding immediate action against McGraw and his associates. The mood shifted from fear to anger as people realized they'd been deliberately poisoned for corporate profit. But McGraw wasn't finished fighting. He signaled to men positioned throughout the crowd, revealing the depth of his preparation for violent resistance. The conspiracy included local enforcement officials and territorial administrators. The confrontation had reached its crucial moment. Either the community would unite behind scientific evidence and moral authority, or corporate criminality would triumph through intimidation and violence. Everything depended on whether families would choose to trust the woman they'd rejected over the banker who'd systematically betrayed their faith and poisoned their children. The vote would determine not just Dusty Ben's survival, but whether justice could prevail against organized corporate evil in the American frontier. The territorial marshal stepped through the town hall doors as McGraw reached for his gun. Marshal Harrison had ridden hard from Denver after receiving Father Miguel's urgent telegraph 3 days earlier. His badge gleamed under the oil lamps as he surveyed the tense crowd. McGraw's hand froze on his weapon. Federal law enforcement changed everything. His local connections meant nothing against territorial jurisdiction. The conspiracy had grown too large to contain through intimidation. Marshal Harrison had brought 2 deputies and a federal prosecutor. They'd intercepted Consolidated Western's communications and gathered evidence from similar operations in Nevada and Arizona. McGraw's scheme was part of a pattern that stretched across 3 territories. The prosecutor read formal charges while the deputies secured McGraw and his associates. Conspiracy to commit murder through deliberate poisoning, fraud in property acquisition schemes, destruction of public infrastructure. Each charge carried sentences that would ensure lifetime imprisonment. Clara May's photographs provided crucial evidence for the federal case. The correspondence revealed Consolidated Western's systematic approach to community destruction. Similar operations had killed hundreds of people across the frontier territories. Tommy Chen's detailed surveillance notes corroborated the poisoning timeline perfectly. His technical drawings showed exact contamination procedures that matched evidence from other crime scenes. The boy's testimony would help prosecute the entire corporate conspiracy. McGraw attempted to negotiate immunity in exchange for cooperation against his corporate handlers, but the evidence was already overwhelming. Federal investigators had been tracking Consolidated Western for months, waiting for sufficient proof to ensure convictions. The banker's arrest triggered immediate relief efforts for contaminated water sources. Marshal Harrison's team included specialists in industrial cleanup who began neutralizing the chemical contamination that same night. Eliza led the technical response to the crisis. Her geological surveys identified every contaminated site and provided treatment protocols for each specific chemical mixture. The cleanup would take weeks, but the poisoning stopped immediately. The Martinez well became the town's primary water source, while other systems underwent purification. Eliza's careful capacity calculations ensured adequate supply for the entire community. The underground river system could support growth for decades. Families began recovering as clean water replaced the contaminated supply. Children's neurological symptoms improved within days. Adults regained strength and appetite. The mysterious illnesses that had plagued the community disappeared completely. Dr. Morrison documented the medical recovery for federal prosecutors. His records showed dramatic health improvements that correlated exactly with the switch to clean water. The evidence would support criminal charges and civil lawsuits against Consolidated Western. The territorial government appointed Eliza as regional water engineer, recognizing her expertise in hydrology and contamination analysis. Her first project involved surveying other communities that might face similar corporate threats. Clara May expanded her saloon into a hotel and restaurant, capitalizing on increased business from federal investigators and cleanup crews. She partnered with Eliza to establish the territory's first woman-owned engineering consultancy. Tommy Chen became Eliza's apprentice, studying geology and hydrology while assisting with regional water surveys. His mechanical skills and keen observation proved invaluable for technical fieldwork. The boy showed exceptional promise for formal engineering education. Father Miguel established a community health monitoring program to prevent future contamination incidents. His medical training and moral authority made him the natural choice for overseeing public health initiatives. Josiah transformed the Broken Arrow Ranch into a model operation for sustainable water management. His partnership with Eliza demonstrated how scientific expertise and practical experience could solve complex environmental challenges. The town council formally apologized to Eliza for their initial treatment and prejudice. They commissioned a bronze plaque honoring her role in saving the community from corporate poisoning. The Martinez Well was renamed the Carter Well in recognition of her father's engineering legacy. Consolidated Western faced federal prosecution that resulted in massive financial penalties and criminal convictions for corporate executives. The company's assets were seized to compensate victims of their poisoning schemes across multiple territories. Other communities requested Eliza's assistance with water management and contamination analysis. Her reputation spread throughout the frontier territories as someone who could solve complex technical problems while standing up to corporate intimidation. The drought finally broke during the autumn rains. But Dusty Bend's water security no longer depended on weather patterns. Eliza's systematic approach to groundwater management provided reliable supplies, regardless of surface conditions. Tommy Chen's family opened the territory's first technical school, offering practical education in engineering and scientific methods. Students came from across the region to study water management, geological analysis, and environmental protection. Clara May's Hotel became headquarters for a network of women business owners who supported each other against discrimination and economic challenges. The partnership model she developed with Eliza inspired similar collaborations throughout the territory. The federal investigation revealed that Consolidated Western had targeted dozens of communities using similar poisoning schemes. Eliza's evidence helped prosecute cases in Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico, saving countless lives. 5 years later, Dusty Bend had grown into a thriving regional center for mining and agriculture. Clean water attracted new families and businesses. The town's prosperity stood as proof that scientific expertise and moral courage could triumph over corporate criminality. Eliza stood before the rebuilt community center, addressing a gathering of territorial governors and federal officials. Her presentation outlined systematic approaches to preventing corporate environmental crimes and protecting frontier communities. The woman who'd once stood in chains on an auction block now held authority that reached across the American West. Her expertise shaped territorial policy and federal legislation. Her dignity had transformed not just one town, but an entire region's approach to justice and equality. The bronze plaque beside the Carter Well bore simple words that captured everything she'd accomplished. Water flows to those who understand its nature. Truth rises for those who seek it with patience. Justice comes to those who stand firm against evil. Tommy Chen, now a certified engineer, maintained the monitoring systems that protected the regional water supply. Clara May's business empire stretched across 3 territories. Father Miguel's health programs had eliminated contamination-related illness throughout the region. The story that began with humiliation and desperation had transformed into triumph and inspiration. Science had defeated superstition. Dignity had overcome prejudice. Truth had conquered corporate deception. The frontier had learned that progress depended on embracing everyone's contributions, regardless of their appearance or background.